Elderly man asks Hell's Angels biker for help. My caregiver told me to stay quiet. At a roadside diner, an elderly man breaks a rule that was meant to keep him alive. He speaks to the one person everyone else avoids. What follows is not violence, but truth, protection, and a reminder that silence is often the most dangerous place to live. The bell above the diner door rang once, sharp and lonely, at 1:18 in the afternoon. Not lunchtime, not quite the quiet hour either. The kind of time when coffee goes cold faster and people stare out windows without realizing they are doing it. Arthur Bell stood just inside the doorway, thin shoulders hunched, hands folded together like they were afraid of each other. He was 81 years old. His jacket hung too large on his frame, as if it once belonged to a stronger version of himself, and he hadn't yet accepted that man was gone. The fabric smelled faintly of soap and something medicinal. His shoes were clean but worn down at the heels. He scanned the diner slowly. Booths half full, a waitress refilling cups, a mother cutting pancakes for a restless child, and then the corner booth. 6 men, leather vests, heavy boots, patches stitched in red and white, Hell's Angels ***. Their bikes were visible through the front window, lined up like quiet animals resting after a long run. They weren't loud. They weren't aggressive. They were just there, talking low, laughing once in a while. Arthur's breathing changed when he saw them. His caregiver's voice echoed in his head, sharp and practiced. You don't talk to strangers. You don't cause trouble. You stay quiet. Arthur swallowed. His right wrist ached under his sleeve. The ache had a memory attached to it. Pressure, fingers. A warning squeezed too hard. He took one step forward, then stopped. For a moment, it looked like he might turn around. Leave. Go back to the small beige house where the windows were always locked and the television stayed on too loud, where silence was safer than honesty. But then one of the bikers looked up. Big man, gray beard, calm eyes, not hard, just tired in a way that came from seeing too much. Arthur felt something shift in his chest, not hope, something quieter. Like permission, he walked toward the booth. Each step hurt, not just his knees, everything. He stopped beside them. His voice came out thin, almost embarrassed. "Sir," he said, looking only at the tabletop, "I was told not to ask, but I don't know who else is safe." The laughter died instantly. The man with the gray beard stood without a word. He moved slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to scare anyone, especially the old man trembling in front of him. "Sit," he said gently, sliding out of the booth. "Please." Arthur hesitated. He looked around, like someone expecting to be corrected, like someone waiting to be told he'd done something wrong. "It's okay," another biker added. This one had scars on his hands, old ones. "You're not in trouble." Arthur sat. The vinyl seat was cracked and cold. His hands shook as he placed them on the table. He tried to steady them by pressing his palms down. It didn't work. "I'm Luke," the gray-bearded man said, kneeling so they were eye level. "These are my brothers. You're safe here." Safe. The word hit Arthur harder than he expected. "I'm Arthur," he said. "Arthur Bell." Luke nodded, like the name mattered, like Arthur mattered. "What's going on?" Luke asked. "Take your time." Arthur stared at his hands. His skin was thin, almost paper-like. Purple bruises bloomed beneath the surface, uneven and finger-shaped. He hadn't planned to show them. His body just decided. A biker with a shaved head leaned forward slightly. His jaw tightened. "Those aren't old." Arthur shook his head. "No, sir." Luke didn't react outwardly, but something changed in his eyes. Focus sharpened. A quiet line appeared between his brows. "My caregiver," Arthur said. The word felt heavy. "She says I forget things. She says I imagine danger. She says if I tell people lies, they won't believe me anyway." Luke waited. "She told me to stay quiet," Arthur whispered. "Said it's for my own good." The diner felt smaller. Even the waitress slowed as she passed, sensing something she couldn't see. Luke rested his forearms on his knees. "Arthur," he said carefully, "did someone hurt you?" Arthur nodded once, then again. Then he broke, not loudly, not dramatically. His shoulders collapsed inward like a tent losing its poles. "I just wanted help with my pills," he said. "I got confused. She grabbed me hard, said I'd be sorry if I made noise." Luke stood, every biker did, and in that moment the quiet in the diner wasn't fear, it was respect. Arthur hadn't always been someone who needed help. There was a time he woke before dawn every day, pulled on steel-toe boots, and packed the same lunch. a ham sandwich, an apple, and coffee in a thermos his wife bought him in 1979. He worked maintenance for the city for 34 years, fixed what other people didn't notice until it broke. His wife, Margaret, used to say he had steady hands and a steady heart. She trusted him with everything, the bills, the car, the furnace that rattled every winter. They were married 49 years. When Margaret died, it wasn't sudden. It was slow. Alzheimer's, the cruel kind that steals pieces one at a time so you're grieving long before the funeral. Arthur learned how to cook, learned how to repeat answers without frustration, learned how to smile even when she looked at him like he was a polite stranger. After she was gone, the house felt too loud and too quiet at the same time. Arthur's memory began slipping a year later. Small things, missed appointments, confusing mornings with evenings. His doctor suggested help. Temporary, they said, just until things stabilized. That's when Denise arrived. She was efficient, clean, spoke quickly, filled out paperwork while talking over him. She told neighbors she was practically family. At first, Arthur was grateful. Then things changed. She controlled his phone, his mail, his pills. She corrected him sharply in public, laughed when he forgot words, told him people would lock him away if he kept making stories. When he protested, she squeezed his wrist, not enough to bruise at first. Luke listened as Arthur spoke. No interruptions, no rush. By the time Arthur finished, his voice was hoarse. Luke straightened and nodded to one of the bikers. "Call it in." Another biker was already on the phone. Arthur panicked. "No police," he said quickly. She said. Luke crouched again. "Arthur," he said, steady and calm. "You didn't do anything wrong, and you're not alone anymore." Arthur searched his face, looking for lies, for cruelty. He didn't find any. Instead, for the first time in a long while, Arthur felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Relief. The police arrived quietly. No sirens. 2 officers who spoke softly and listened carefully. A report was taken. Photos documented. A social worker was called. Arthur watched it all like someone watching weather roll in, unsure whether it would bring destruction or relief. Luke stayed beside him the entire time. When Denise arrived at the diner, her smile disappeared the moment she saw the bikes. She talked fast, too fast, claimed confusion, claimed stress, claimed Arthur was difficult. The officers didn't argue. They just listened and wrote everything down. Denise was escorted away. Arthur didn't cheer. He didn't cry. He just sat there, hands folded, breathing. The social worker explained next steps: temporary housing, a new caregiver, safety. Arthur nodded. It all sounded unreal. Before he left, he turned to Luke. "I was afraid of you," Arthur said honestly. Luke smiled faintly. "Most people are." Arthur looked at the patches, the leather, the size of him. "But you listened," Arthur said. "That mattered." Luke placed a hand over his heart. "My mother raised me to listen to people who whisper," he said. "They usually have the most important things to say." Arthur nodded. He stood slowly, joints protesting. At the door, he paused and looked back one last time. The men in the booth didn't look dangerous now. They looked like guardians. And for the first time since Margaret died, Arthur Bell walked outside without fear of speaking. Arthur spent his first night away from his house in a small, quiet room at a temporary care residence on the edge of town. The walls were pale blue, the kind of color chosen because it doesn't argue with anyone. A single lamp sat on the nightstand, its light soft and warm, not harsh like the overhead bulbs Denise used to keep on. He lay awake for hours. Not because he was afraid, but because no one told him to be quiet. No one corrected him when he asked the same question twice to the night nurse. No one sighed loudly or rolled their eyes. When he apologized for forgetting her name, she smiled and said, "That's okay, Arthur. I'll remind you as many times as you need." He stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sound of safety. His wrist still hurt. A deep ache that pulsed gently, like a reminder of what had been allowed to happen when silence was easier than resistance. He thought of Luke, the weight of the man's presence, the way he listened without rushing, without doubt. Arthur had lived most of his life believing strength was quiet, that decent men didn't make scenes, that asking for help was a failure of planning or character. Margaret used to tell him otherwise. "You don't get medals for suffering alone," she'd said once, after he tried to hide chest pain instead of going to the hospital. She had been right then, too. In the morning, a social worker named Hannah came by. She spoke slowly, clearly. She explained what would happen next: legal steps, medical evaluations, a new caregiver one Arthur would help choose. "You have rights," she said gently. The word felt strange. Rights, like something meant for other people. Later that afternoon, there was a knock at his door. Luke stood there, helmet under his arm, leather vest folded neatly like he didn't want it to intimidate the room. "Just checking in," Luke said. "Didn't want you thinking yesterday was a one-time thing." Arthur swallowed. His eyes burned. "You came back," he said. Luke nodded. "I said you weren't alone. I meant it." And something inside Arthur finally unclenched. The investigation moved faster than Arthur expected. Denise's past didn't hold up well under light. Previous complaints, short-term jobs, patients who had suddenly been transferred or hospitalized, patterns Arthur would never have seen on his own. Arthur met with doctors who tested his memory gently, respectfully. They didn't talk over him. They didn't assume. They explained results instead of hiding them behind closed doors. Mild cognitive impairment. Manageable, not the monster Denise had made it out to be. "You're still you," one doctor told him. "You just need support, not control." Arthur repeated that sentence to himself later, sitting by the window. Still you. Luke stopped by every few days, sometimes with coffee, sometimes just to sit. They didn't always talk. Luke understood silence in a way few people did, the kind that doesn't pressure you to fill it. One afternoon, Arthur asked a question that had been sitting in his chest. "Why did you help me?" he said. "You didn't know me." Luke shrugged lightly. "My father didn't ask for help when he needed it, thought he could handle everything himself. By the time he did speak up, it was too late." Arthur nodded. He understood that kind of regret. The diner became a quiet landmark in Arthur's recovery, the place where something broke open, where fear lost its grip. He thought often about how close he had come to turning around at the door. One step either way, two different lives. A new caregiver was introduced, Maria, middle-aged, calm voice, asked permission before touching anything. She wrote things down and encouraged Arthur to do the same. When Arthur forgot something, she didn't scold. She adapted. For the first time in months, Arthur began sleeping through the night, and slowly, quietly, he began trusting himself again. The court date came on a gray Thursday morning. Arthur wore his best sweater, the one Margaret liked. He stood a little straighter than usual, even though his knees protested. Luke sat behind him in the courtroom, not close enough to crowd, but close enough to be felt. Denise avoided his eyes. When Arthur was asked to speak, his mouth went dry, his heart raced. Old habits whispered that this was too much, that he should let others talk for him, but then he remembered the booth, the kneeling biker. The moment's silence lost its power. "I was told to stay quiet," Arthur said clearly, "but quiet almost cost me my life." The room was still. He spoke slowly, about the wrist, the pills, the fear of being locked away, about how easy it is to control someone when you convince them they are broken. The judge listened. When it was over, Arthur felt empty and light. Outside the courthouse, Luke clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You did good." Arthur shook his head. "I did honest." Luke smiled. "That's harder." Denise lost her license. Criminal charges followed. Arthur didn't feel victory, just relief, and a deep sadness for how many people never get a chance to be heard. Later that evening, Arthur returned to the diner. Same booth, same cracked vinyl, same bell over the door. Luke and his brothers looked up and smiled. Arthur ordered coffee, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to take up space. Months passed. Arthur moved back into his home with adjustments, ramps, labels. A calendar filled with reminders written in his... Arthur's world grew larger in quiet ways, not with travel or big announcements, but with small freedoms he hadn't realized he'd lost. Choosing when to eat, leaving the house without asking permission, letting the phone ring without panic tightening his chest. One afternoon, he stood in the hallway holding his coat, unable to remember where he was planning to go. The old fear rose fast, that familiar voice telling him this meant he was failing again. But instead of freezing, Arthur sat down. He waited. After a moment, he smiled softly. "It'll come back," he said aloud, and it did. The diner. He drove there slowly, both hands on the wheel, heart steady. When he walked in, the bell rang just the same. Same sound, same time of day. Luke was already there with two of his brothers. They didn't stand this time. They didn't rush. They waved. Arthur felt something settle into place, not dependent. Belonging, they talked about nothing important. Weather, a leaky roof, a bike that wouldn't start. Arthur realized that this was what healing looked like. Not drama, not speeches, just normal moments where fear wasn't in charge. When he got home, he found a voicemail on his phone. A woman's voice. Careful, hesitant. "Dad, it's me. I heard what happened. I'm so sorry I didn't call sooner." Arthur sat down hard. His daughter, Elaine, they hadn't spoken in nearly 4 years. The distance had started small, missed calls, misunderstood comments, and then turned into something neither of them knew how to fix. Arthur listened to the message twice, then a third time. He didn't call back right away. He needed time to feel what he was feeling. But that night he slept with the light off. Elaine came 2 weeks later. She stood on the porch like a guest, not a daughter, hands folded, eyes searching Arthur's face for signs of anger. Arthur opened the door slowly. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Elaine stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. Arthur closed his eyes. His arms trembled as he hugged her back. "I almost did." They sat at the kitchen table where Margaret used to drink her tea. Arthur told her everything, not dramatically, just honestly, about Denise, about the diner, about the bikers who listened when he finally spoke. Elaine cried quietly, the kind of crying that comes with guilt. "I should have pushed harder," she said. Arthur shook his head. "I should have said I needed help." They shared the blame and let it go. Elaine met Maria, met Hannah. She saw the systems in place, the calendar, the notes, the life Arthur had rebuilt. Later that evening, Arthur drove Elaine to the diner. Luke stood when he saw them, not out of alarm, but respect. "This is my daughter," Arthur said, his voice steady. "She came back." Luke smiled at Elaine. "He's tougher than he looks." Elaine laughed through tears. That night, Arthur realized something important. Asking for help hadn't made him smaller. It had brought his family back. The story didn't end with applause or headlines. It ended with consistency. Court updates came and went. Denise faded into paperwork and distance. Arthur focused on living. He volunteered twice a week at the community garden, helping kids plant things that needed patience. He forgot names sometimes. No one minded. He spoke at a small senior center once, standing at a podium that made his knees shake. "If someone tells you silence will keep you safe," Arthur said, gripping the edges, "please remember silence almost killed me." People listened. Luke and his brothers attended quietly, sitting in the back. Arthur spotted them and smiled. Afterward, a woman took his hand and said, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." That stayed with him. Some evenings, Arthur sat alone in his living room, Margaret's photo nearby. He talked to her like he always had. "You were right," he'd say, "about not suffering alone." He imagined her smiling. The fear didn't vanish forever. It never does, but it stopped being in control. Arthur learned the difference between forgetting and being forgotten. He was still here, and he was heard. On the anniversary of that diner day, Arthur brought a small framed photo. It showed the corner booth, the plaque, the words, "You are safe here." He handed it to Luke. "So I don't forget," Arthur said. "And so you don't either." Luke accepted it carefully. "I won't." They sat together, coffee cooling between them. Arthur looked around the diner, at the ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware how close some of them might be to silence. He cleared his throat. "I used to think strength meant enduring," Arthur said. "Now I think it means speaking." Luke nodded. "Took me a while to learn that too." Arthur stood slowly, his body older, his spirit steadier. At the door, he paused and looked back one last time, not at fear, at proof. Proof that kindness doesn't always look gentle. Sometimes it looks like a biker kneeling to listen. Sometimes it looks like an old man choosing to speak anyway. Arthur Bell rang the bell on his way out, and this time it sounded like freedom. Life did not become perfect after that. Arthur still forgot where he left his glasses, still woke some mornings unsure what day it was, still felt the quiet fear creep in when routines changed too fast. Healing, he learned, wasn't a straight line. It curved, it paused, sometimes it doubled back, but now fear had competition. On Sundays, Elaine called without fail. Sometimes they talked for an hour, sometimes for 10 minutes. Sometimes they just stayed on the line, listening to each other breathe while doing dishes or folding laundry. Neither rushed to hang up anymore. Arthur kept a small notebook in his pocket. He wrote things down, not because he was ashamed of forgetting, but because remembering mattered. One page held a short list. Ask for help. Say when something hurts. Silence is not safety. He read it often. The diner staff began to recognize him. The waitress poured his coffee before he asked. She called him hun and meant it. Once she told him her own father was struggling with memory loss. Arthur listened. That had become his quiet mission, to listen the way he had been listened to. One afternoon, a man about Arthur's age sat alone at the counter, hands shaking slightly. Arthur recognized the posture immediately, the guarded stillness, the practiced politeness. Arthur walked over. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. The man hesitated, then nodded. They talked about nothing at first, then something. Then the man's voice dropped. "They say I imagine things," the man whispered. Arthur didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He just listened. Later, as Arthur walked home, the sun low and warm against his face, he realized something important. The moment he chose to speak hadn't just saved him. It had changed the way he moved through the world. Luke never called himself a hero. He still rode, still laughed loud, still carried his own quiet history: a father lost too early, mistakes that couldn't be undone, regrets that lingered longer than scars. But the photo Arthur gave him stayed on the wall of the clubhouse. New members noticed it. "What's that?" they'd ask. Luke would say, a reminder that strength isn't volume, that intimidation and protection aren't the same thing, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is lower yourself to eye level and listen. Arthur didn't know how many lives that reminder touched. He only knew his own. On the first warm day of spring, Arthur stood in his garden, dirt under his fingernails, tomato plants tied gently to stakes. The sun caught Margaret's old wind chime, making it sing softly. He closed his eyes. "Thank you," he said, not to anyone in particular, or maybe to everyone. Later, he drove past the diner, didn't stop this time, just smiled as he went by. He didn't need the booth anymore. The safety it gave him lived inside now. Arthur Bell was still an ordinary man, but his truth was no longer quiet. There are people like Arthur everywhere, in apartments, in houses with locked windows, in rooms where the television stays on too loud to drown out fear. People told that silence is safer, that speaking up will only make things worse. Most of them are not looking for heroes. They are looking for listeners. Arthur's story didn't end with justice alone. It ended with connection, with dignity restored piece by piece, with the understanding that asking for help is not weakness, it is courage wearing ordinary clothes. One voice, one step forward, one moment of choosing to speak. That was all it took. And sometimes the person who listens is not who you expect. Sometimes they look intimidating. Sometimes they wear leather. Sometimes they've been judged their whole lives and know exactly how it feels. Arthur Bell learned that safety is not found in silence. It is found in being heard. And once you know that truth, you never walk the same way again. If this story moved you, you're not alone, and neither are they. Please like subscribe and press the bell icon to help us share more stories that remind people their